Hello everyone. Welcome back to another year in gaming. Last time we explored 1994, one of the most groundbreaking years ever, and now we move into 1995, a year that didn't just build momentum, but completely shifted the industry into a new era. 1995 was a massive year beyond gaming as well. Millions were glued to the O.J. Simpson trial, which dominated headlines for months before ending in a shocking not guilty verdict. Tragedy struck with the Oklahoma City bombing, one of the deadliest attacks in U.S. history. At the same time, technology took a huge leap forward with Windows 95 launching to massive success, while companies like Amazon and eBay emerged, signaling the early rise of the Internet age. In theaters, 1995 delivered hit after hit. Toy Story changed animation forever as the first fully computer-animated film, while blockbusters like Batman Forever, GoldenEye, Apollo 13, Die Hard with a Vengeance, Casper, Jumanji, and Pocahontas dominated the box office. Television also expanded in a big way with the launches of the WB and UPN, alongside new shows like Hercules, The Legacy Journey, Xena Warrior Princess, Road Rules, Star Trek, Voyager, Pinky and the Brain, and The Drew Carey Show, while Full House aired its final episode. Music in 1995 was just as iconic. Songs like You Oughta Know, by Alanis Morissette, Waterfalls by TLC, Fantasy by Mariah Carey, You're Not Alone by Michael Jackson, Gangsta's Paradise by Coolio, Ants Marching by the Dave Matthews Band, and Big Papa by Notorious B.I.G. ruled the charts. In sports, Michael Jordan made his legendary return to the NBA after 2 years. Meanwhile, the New Jersey Devils captured their first Stanley Cup, as they defeated the Detroit Red Wings in a 4-game sweep. The San Francisco 49ers defeated the San Diego Chargers 49-26 in Super Bowl 29, winning the franchise's 5th Super Bowl. And wrestling changed forever when World Championship Wrestling launched WCW Monday Nitro to compete with the World Wrestling Federation's Monday Night Raw, igniting the Monday Night Wars. But while all of this was happening, the gaming industry was entering a true turning point. 1995 marked the beginning of the next-generation console war. Sega launched the Sega Saturn in North America, while newcomer Sony made a massive entrance with the PlayStation. This wasn't just another console launch, this was the moment Sony officially became a major force in gaming. Meanwhile, Nintendo took a different approach, delaying their next-gen system to continue supporting the Super Nintendo, delivering standout titles that would define the system's legacy. And over in arcades and pop culture, Mortal Kombat 3 pushed the franchise even further into the mainstream, alongside the release of the Mortal Kombat movie, helping cement gaming as a major entertainment force. And perhaps one of the most important industry milestones of all, 1995 saw the debut of Electronic Entertainment Expo. For the first time, the gaming industry had a massive global stage, where companies could showcase their biggest games and hardware. It became the center of gaming hype for decades to come. 1995 wasn't just another year, it was the beginning of a new generation. A new competitor entered the arena, the battle lines were drawn, and the future of gaming was about to change forever. So with that said, let's dive into the games that defined 1995. 1. PlayStation arrives in North America in a big way. 1995 marked the true beginning of PlayStation's rise in North America. Just 9 months earlier, Sony had launched the console in Japan, where it quickly became a success, but the real test was always going to be the North American market, the biggest and most competitive gaming battleground in the world. On September 9, 1995, Sony officially brought the PlayStation to North America, and it didn't just arrive, it made a statement. Priced aggressively at $299, the system offered cutting-edge 3D graphics, impressive sound, and a growing library of games that immediately caught the attention of gamers. Compared to what was already on the market, the PlayStation felt like a glimpse into the future. What made this moment even bigger was the backstory. Sony's entry into gaming came after a failed partnership with Nintendo, a rejection that ultimately pushed Sony to go all in on creating its own console. What started as a setback quickly turned into one of the most important origin stories in gaming history. The result? A console launch that didn't just succeed, it reshaped the entire industry. The PlayStation proved that Sony was a serious competitor, and from that moment on, the gaming landscape would never be the same. 2. The Sega Saturn arrives in North America, and things go wrong. While PlayStation was building momentum, Sega was entering the next generation race with its own system, the Sega Saturn. After dominating the early 90s with the Sega Genesis, Sega was now stepping into a new era, this time facing not only Nintendo, but also a brand new competitor in Sony. The Saturn had already launched in Japan in 1994, and expectations were high for its North American release. Many industry analysts believed Sega would continue its winning streak and easily outpace the newcomer PlayStation. But the reality of 1995 told a very different story. At the Electronic Entertainment Expo, Sega made a shocking and controversial move. Instead of sticking to the planned launch strategy, Sega announced that the Saturn was available immediately in North America. This sudden, surprise launch caught retailers completely off guard. Many weren't prepared with stock, marketing, or shelf space. Developers were also left scrambling, as the rushed release created confusion around game availability and support. To make matters worse, the console launched at a steep $399 price point, significantly higher than its main rival. That pricing, combined with limited third-party support and poor communication with retailers, quickly created frustration across the industry. What was meant to be Sega's next big victory instead became a turning point. The Saturn struggled to match expectations, especially as the PlayStation offered a stronger mix of pricing, performance, and developer support. The momentum Sega had built with the Genesis era began to fade, and 1995 marked the beginning of a much more difficult chapter for the company. 3. Nintendo delays the Ultra 64, a risky move that paid off. Back in late 1994, Nintendo revealed its upcoming next-generation system, originally known as the Ultra 64. The plan was ambitious: launch in the holiday season of 1995 and go head-to-head with both PlayStation and the Sega Saturn in the rapidly heating next-gen console war. But in March 1995, Nintendo made a surprising decision: they delayed the console's release to 1996. At first, many fans were disappointed, since they were eager to see Nintendo's answer to the next generation of gaming. It looked like Nintendo was falling behind while competitors were already on the market. However, this delay turned out to be a smart strategic move. By stepping back, Nintendo avoided rushing into an already crowded and chaotic launch window dominated by Sega and Sony. Instead of getting caught in the middle of the early price wars and third-party struggles, Nintendo gave developers more time to fully understand the hardware and build stronger games. That patience ultimately paid off. The system, later officially named the Nintendo 64, would launch the following year with a much stronger lineup and a clearer identity. In a year where both Sega and Sony were fighting for dominance, Nintendo chose a different path, waiting, refining, and preparing for a stronger entry. 4. The birth of E3. In the early days of the video game industry, major announcements didn't have a dedicated stage. Companies like Sega, Nintendo, and others often showcased their games at larger trade shows like CES, where gaming was just a small part of the floor, sometimes even placed in less prominent areas because the industry wasn't yet seen as a mainstream entertainment force. To change that, the industry formed the Entertainment Software Association, which helped create a brand new event focused entirely on video games. This led to the launch of the Electronic Entertainment Expo known as E3 in Los Angeles at the Los Angeles Convention Center, giving gaming its own global spotlight for the very first time. E3 quickly became the industry's answer to CES, but with a much bigger focus on hype, reveals, and competition. All the major players were there: Sega, Nintendo, and newcomer Sony, each trying to prove they would define the next generation of gaming. One of the most defining moments came during the build-up to the console war. Sega's early and chaotic Saturn announcement set a confusing tone for the event, while Sony took a different approach, delivering a clean, confident reveal of the PlayStation. When the price was announced, $299, it instantly shifted momentum in Sony's favor and became one of the most talked-about moments in gaming history. That single announcement helped establish Sony as a serious contender almost overnight. From that point on, E3 became the biggest stage in gaming, shaping how games were revealed and marketed for decades. Developers, publishers, and fans all looked forward to it as the center of gaming news and excitement each year. While the event eventually ended in 2023, its legacy remains enormous. E3 helped turn video games into a global entertainment spectacle, and 1995 was where it all truly began. 5. Donkey Kong Country 2: Diddy's Kong Quest. While the next-generation battle between Sega and Sony was heating up in 1995, Nintendo was still proving that the 16-bit era of the Super Nintendo had plenty of life left in it. One of the biggest examples of that was Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Kong Quest, the highly anticipated sequel to the original hit. Developed by Rare, the game continued the pre-rendered visual style that had stunned players in the first installment, pushing the Super NES hardware even further than many thought possible. This time, the story followed Diddy Kong, joined by a new playable character, Dixie Kong, as they set out on a mission to rescue Donkey Kong after his capture. The gameplay expanded on the original with tighter controls, more complex level design, and a greater emphasis on exploration and challenge. Players could switch between Diddy and Dixie, each offering unique abilities that changed how levels could be approached. Building on the foundation of the first game, Rare once again delivered what many considered a technical and creative masterpiece on the Super NES. The visuals, soundtrack, and level variety helped the game stand out even in a year dominated by next-gen hype. Despite the arrival of new hardware, Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Kong Quest proved that the Super NES was still a powerhouse in its own right, becoming one of the standout titles of 1995 and reinforcing Nintendo's strength in software even as the industry prepared for a new generation. 6. Yoshi gets his own game in Yoshi's Island. Even as the gaming world was shifting toward next-generation hardware from Sony and Sega, Nintendo was still delivering standout experiences on the Super Nintendo in 1995. One of the most memorable releases of the year was Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island, giving Yoshi his first starring role after being introduced in Super Mario World. Instead of Mario leading the adventure, players took control of Yoshi, tasked with protecting and guiding baby Mario across dangerous stages after baby Luigi is kidnapped by the evil wizard Comic. The gameplay introduced a unique twist. Yoshi could swallow enemies, transform them into eggs, and use them as projectiles to solve puzzles and defeat enemies. Combined with its hand-drawn, crayon-like art style, the game stood out dramatically from anything else on the Super NES at the time. It didn't just look different, it felt different. Despite being released late in the Super NES lifecycle, Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island became one of the system's most acclaimed titles. It proved that Nintendo still had creative power even as the industry was transitioning into the 32-bit era. In a year defined by new consoles and rising competition, Yoshi's first solo adventure showed that the Super NES wasn't finished yet. It was still capable of producing some of its most imaginative and beloved games. 7. Mortal Kombat arrives in arcade and home console. One of the biggest fighting game releases of 1995 came from the legendary franchise Mortal Kombat 3, which first hit arcades and immediately became one of the most talked about titles in the genre. Building on the success of its predecessors, the game introduced a new wave of fighters, including Cyrax, Kabal, Nightwolf, Sindel, Shiva, and Stryker, alongside returning favorites like Liu Kang. Arcade players across the world flocked to experience the latest entry, and it quickly became one of the most popular fighting games of its time. The fast-paced gameplay, new combo system, and expanded roster helped push the series even further into mainstream success. Later that year, in October 1995, Mortal Kombat 3 made its way to home consoles, bringing the arcade experience into living rooms. One of the most notable versions arrived on the newly released PlayStation, which was powerful enough to closely replicate the arcade visuals, sound, and intensity that fans had experienced in arcades. This home release became a major milestone for fighting games, as it showed just how close console hardware was getting to arcade-level performance. For many players, it felt like having the arcade at home, complete with the same brutal action and fast gameplay that made the series famous. In 1995, Mortal Kombat 3 didn't just continue the franchise, it helped cement fighting games as one of the defining genres of the decade. 8. Mortal Kombat goes Hollywood and finally gets it right. While Mortal Kombat 3 was dominating arcades and home consoles, the franchise was about to take a bold step into Hollywood. On August 18, 1995, the live-action Mortal Kombat hit theaters, bringing one of gaming's most popular fighting series to the big screen. At the time, video game movies didn't have the best reputation. Recent adaptations like Super Mario Bros. And Street Fighter had disappointed both critics and fans, so expectations for this new adaptation were relatively low. Many assumed it would be another failed attempt to translate a game into a movie. Instead, the Mortal Kombat surprised audiences by actually capturing the spirit of the games. It embraced the lore, the characters, and the over-the-top action that fans loved, while still keeping the tone accessible for a wider audience. Although toned down compared to the games, the film still delivered stylized combat, iconic moments, and a strong sense of identity tied directly to the franchise. The result was a breakout success. The film topped the box office for multiple weeks, including a strong showing over Labor Day weekend, proving that video game movies could actually work when handled with the right approach. For the first time, a major gaming franchise successfully crossed into Hollywood in a way that resonated with both fans and general audiences. While later sequels would struggle to match its impact, the original Mortal Kombat remains a landmark moment in both gaming and film history, marking the first real victory for video game adaptations on the big screen. 9. Chrono Trigger, the RPG that defined an era. In 1995, while the industry was shifting toward next-generation consoles like the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn, the Super Nintendo was still delivering some of its most legendary titles. One of the absolute standouts was Chrono Trigger. Developed by a legendary, dream team of creators from Square, including talent behind major RPG franchises, Chrono Trigger pushed storytelling, gameplay, and presentation on the Super NES to an entirely new level. It followed Chrono and his party as they traveled through time, trying to prevent a catastrophic future, with choices and multiple endings that gave players real replay value and impact. What made the game so special wasn't just its story, it was how ahead of its time it felt. The battle system blended traditional turn-based combat with active elements, the soundtrack became instantly iconic, and the time travel structure gave the adventure a scope that few games on any platform had attempted before. Even in a year dominated by the rise of new hardware, Chrono Trigger proved that the Super NES still had unmatched creative power. Today, it's remembered not just as one of the best RPGs on the system, but as one of the greatest video games ever made. 10. Twisted Metal, Sony's first big first-party style hit. As PlayStation was launching in North America and proving itself in the console war against Sega Saturn, one of its earliest standout titles helped define what the system was all about: Twisted Metal. Released during the early life of the PlayStation under Sony's growing first-party and partnered lineup, Twisted Metal introduced players to chaotic vehicular combat where heavily armed vehicles battled in destructible arenas. It wasn't just about racing, it was about survival, strategy, and pure arcade-style destruction. What made it especially important for Sony was that it showed the identity of the PlayStation early on: edgy, 3D-focused, and designed for older audiences compared to traditional console games at the time. The game's dark tone, explosive gameplay, and memorable characters helped it stand out immediately in a crowded launch window. More than just a hit game, Twisted Metal became a proof of concept for what the PlayStation could do. It helped establish the foundation of Sony's future success in gaming, showing that the PlayStation wasn't just competing, it was building an entirely new style of gaming identity. 11. Rayman, Ubisoft's answer to Mario and Sonic. In 1995, as the console war between PlayStation and Sega Saturn was heating up, a new platform mascot entered the scene from Ubisoft: Rayman. At a time when Nintendo had Mario and Sega had Sonic, Ubisoft needed its own flagship character to compete in the platforming space. That answer was Rayman, a unique hero with no arms or legs, designed with a distinctive art style that immediately set the game apart from other mascots of the era. Rayman stood out not just because of its character design, but also because of its smooth animation, colorful worlds, and challenging platforming gameplay. It helped establish Ubisoft as a serious player in the industry during the mid-90s, especially in the growing 2D to 3D transition period. While it didn't directly dethrone Mario or Sonic, Rayman proved there was room for new mascots in gaming's evolving landscape. It became the foundation of a long-running franchise and showed that even in a year dominated by next-gen hype, original platformers could still make a strong impact. 12. Jumping Flash, the first leap into true 3D platforming. In 1995, while the launch of the PlayStation was redefining what home consoles could do, one of its most experimental early titles helped show off its power in a completely new way: Jumping Flash. Developed by Exact and published under Sony's growing PlayStation lineup, the game put players in control of a robotic rabbit navigating fully 3D environments from a first-person perspective. Instead of traditional side-scrolling platforming like earlier games from Nintendo or Sega, this was something completely new: vertical jumping, open 3D levels, and camera movement that felt revolutionary at the time. Jumping Flash wasn't just a tech demo, it was a proof of concept. It showed that the PlayStation could handle fully realized 3D worlds long before many competitors had similar experiences. The exaggerated jumping mechanics, colorful environments, and surreal level design made it stand out as one of the earliest true 3D platformers in gaming history. While later 3D platformers would refine the formula, Jumping Flash remains important as one of the first games to truly imagine what platforming could look like in 3 dimensions, helping define the future direction of the genre. 13. Virtual Boy, a nightmarish disaster. While Nintendo was already preparing for its true next-generation leap with the future Nintendo 64, the company attempted an early experiment in virtual reality with a strange new device, the Virtual Boy. Released in 1995, the Virtual Boy was Nintendo's bold and risky attempt to bring immersive, virtual reality gaming into the home. Instead of a traditional TV setup, players looked into a tabletop headset that displayed games in a stark red and black stereoscopic 3D image. At the time, VR was a growing buzzword in the mid-90s tech world, and Nintendo tried to get ahead of the trend. However, the reality was far less impressive than the concept. The system's uncomfortable setup, limited portability, and harsh monochrome red visuals made long play sessions difficult for many players. Instead of feeling like a futuristic leap, it often felt more like a strain on the eyes than an evolution of gaming. Despite a small library of games, the Virtual Boy struggled to gain traction. The system launched in 1995 but was quickly discontinued in 1996, becoming one of Nintendo's most infamous missteps. In the end, the Virtual Boy stands as a cautionary moment in gaming history, an ambitious idea that arrived too early and executed in a way that couldn't match player expectations. 14. Nintendo discontinues the NES in North America. As the industry moved deeper into the 16-bit era and toward next-generation systems like the PlayStation and the Sega Saturn, Nintendo made a major historic decision in 1995 regarding one of its most important systems. In July 1995, Nintendo officially ended production of the Nintendo Entertainment System in North America, closing the chapter on a console that had defined a generation. After roughly a decade in the market, Nintendo also stopped first-party development support as players increasingly transitioned to the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. The NES had been the system that helped revive the video game industry in the 1980s, establishing Nintendo as a dominant force and bringing gaming back into mainstream culture. However, by the mid-1990s, the industry had clearly evolved, and attention shifted toward more advanced hardware and 16-bit experiences. Even though support ended, the legacy of the Nintendo Entertainment System remained massive. It wasn't just another console, it was the foundation of modern console gaming and the system that set the stage for everything that followed, from the Super NES to the future Nintendo 64 era. 15. Mega Man 7 finally arrives on Super NES. One of Capcom's most iconic franchises made a major leap in 1995 as the Blue Bomber finally landed on the 16-bit generation with Mega Man 7 for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. After years of success on the original Nintendo Entertainment System, the series transitioned into a new era with bigger sprites, more detailed environments, and enhanced audio that showcased what the Super NES hardware could do. The shift to 16-bit visuals gave Mega Man a more polished and modern look, helping the series stay relevant during a rapidly changing gaming landscape. In Mega Man 7, players once again took control of Mega Man as he battled through a new set of robot masters and faced the return of Dr. Wily. The gameplay stayed true to the classic formula, tight platforming, challenging boss fights, and weapon-based progression, while adding a more cinematic presentation compared to earlier entries. The game also marked an important turning point for the franchise, bridging the gap between the 8-bit legacy and the evolving expectations of 16-bit gaming. Even as new consoles like the PlayStation and Sega Saturn were entering the market, Mega Man 7 proved that classic gameplay could still thrive in a new generation. 15. Madden NFL 96 cancelled, and the birth of NFL Game Day. As the PlayStation began building momentum in North America, one of the most surprising early shifts in its software lineup came from a major sports franchise. Madden NFL 96, developed by Electronic Arts, was one of the biggest football games of the era and a key name in sports gaming. However, during the early life of the PlayStation, EA's support for the new platform was limited, and the PlayStation version of Madden NFL 96 never fully materialized as part of Sony's early push. This left a major gap in the console's sports lineup at a critical time, especially as competitors were building strong third-party support. Rather than waiting for outside publishers to fill that space, Sony made a bold move, It created its own football franchise to compete directly. That answer came in the form of NFL Game Day, developed under Sony's internal studios. NFL Game Day was designed specifically to showcase what the PlayStation could do with 3D graphics, smooth animation, and a more cinematic presentation of American football. While Madden had the legacy name, Game Day was built to represent the future of sports gaming on Sony's new platform. What started as a licensing gap quickly turned into a rivalry. Sony's push with NFL Game Day helped establish the PlayStation as a serious competitor in sports games, proving that even without EA's full early support, the system could still deliver top-tier athletic experiences. 16. Tekken arrives in the US and on PlayStation, and Tekken 2 raises the bar. While Mortal Kombat 3 was still dominating arcades in North America, a very different style of fighting game began gaining momentum in 1995. Tekken from Bandai Namco. After first gaining attention in Japan, Tekken arrived in North American arcades in March 1995, introducing players to something new for the genre: fully realized 3D fighting environments. Instead of traditional 2D plane combat, Tekken allowed fighters to move in and around a 3D space, which immediately set it apart from its competition. Later that same year, the franchise took an even bigger leap when the home console version was released on PlayStation in November 1995. This helped establish the PlayStation as a serious home for arcade-quality fighting games, especially as it continued to build its identity during its first year in North America. Meanwhile, the series was already evolving. Tekken 2 was released in arcades, expanding the roster with new fighters like Jun Kazama, Lei Wulong, and Jack 2, alongside returning characters such as Heihachi Mishima and Kazuya Mishima. The sequel improved everything from animation to combat depth, refining the foundation laid by the original. With smoother gameplay, stronger visuals, and a deeper fighting system, Tekken 2 solidified the franchise as one of the leading forces in 3D fighting games. It showed that the series wasn't just innovative, it was built to evolve and lead the next generation of competitive fighting games. 1995 was truly a turning point year for gaming, marking the moment the industry shifted into a brand new era. PlayStation made its North American debut and immediately changed the landscape, establishing Sony as a major force in the console market almost overnight. At the same time, the Sega Saturn launched, but it also marked the beginning of a difficult decline for Sega as it struggled to maintain the dominance it once had in the 16-bit era. Meanwhile, Nintendo chose a different strategy, waiting on its next-generation system while still delivering powerhouse 16-bit titles like Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Kong Quest and Super Mario World 2, Yoshi's Island, proving the Super NES was still a major force even in a transitioning market. 1995 also delivered some of the most important and influential games across multiple platforms. Arcade and console hits like Mortal Kombat 3 pushed fighting games into the mainstream, while titles such as Twisted Metal, NFL Game Day, Jumping Flash, and Mega Man 7 showed just how much creativity and technical ambition the industry had reached. Even beyond gaming, the live-action Mortal Kombat helped finally prove that video game movies could succeed when done right, changing how Hollywood viewed gaming adaptations. However, not everything was a success. The Virtual Boy became one of Nintendo's most infamous missteps, remembered for its uncomfortable design and limited appeal. And perhaps most importantly, 1995 gave the industry a true global stage with the birth of the Electronic Entertainment Expo, forever changing how games would be revealed, marketed, and celebrated. Looking back, it's clear that 1995 wasn't just another year in gaming history. It was the year the modern gaming industry truly began to take shape. And just a decade earlier, in 1985, Nintendo had helped save the industry. By 1995, that same industry had evolved into something bigger, faster, and far more competitive than anyone could have imagined.